All right. All right.
He'll pull it. We just have to edit it if we need to.
All right. Well, I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 Board Workshop of April 19th, 2024. Would everyone please stand together and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Terrific. Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to introduce our participants for this morning, and starting at my far right is Ms. Marianne Southwick, Clerk of the Board, Dr. Sean Hawker, Superintendent. To my immediate left is Ms. Heather Tenbrink, Board Member, Ms. Allie Anderton, Board Member, Mr. Jimmy McAndrew, Board Member. I'm Rebecca Smith, Board Chair, and Leslie Berkey, Vice Chair, is joining us by phone. Public comment will not be taken. Hi, Leslie.
Hi.
Public comment will not be taken at this meeting. Comments for the board may be submitted via email at trustees@cdaschools.org or in writing through the clerk. Thank you. Before we approve our agenda, just some of us were privileged this morning to attend the Coeur d'Alene Regional Chamber Scholarship Breakfast. And what an incredible way to start our morning, as just a reminder that our community believes in education, and what an incredible opportunity for our students. Many of our elementary schools were mentioned, our middle schools, as well as our high schools, and just the impact for all those students that are launching. And so thanks especially to our community, to the tribe, who gave not only for those 100 plus students a $1,000 scholarship this year, but a $1,000 scholarship for those that stay in school again for next year as well. So in light of all of our decisions, it was a blessing for the heart and an encouragement to see those students and their achievements. So thank you to everyone for that. Over 100 students received scholarships. So 115. So throughout our region. And so it was a tremendous way to start our morning. So is there a motion this morning to approve today's agenda? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hey.
Thank you. Thank you. Especially this meeting is being recorded and will be put back on the web just as soon as we can. Our next meeting on the 29th will be live streamed, and there will be public comment at that period in that meeting as well. We do want to thank everyone who has submitted public comment via our trustees at CDA Schools. We've received tons of public comment, and so we're really thankful and grateful for that. And I know we as trustees are reading through all of the comment and receiving that. We look forward. Some trustees are able to gather on Saturday for a time in the park, and so we thank trustees that are able to do that and for bringing that together. And we encourage folks to attend that and continue as we walk through these decisions. Let's see here. The purpose of this meeting today, just as a reminder, was an opportunity following last meeting. We all heard from trustees through Ms. Southwick that coming together just for a board meeting for some discussion time before the 29th was important. And so to continually ask some questions and get some clarification and continue to understand where we're at with different decisions. And so felt like this was an important time that we needed a workshop ourselves to be able to time to digest and then to come back together. And so that really is the purpose of this time here, is for some work sessions, and we will have an executive session following this meeting at the end. So, all right. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Hawker then.
All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Chair Smith. Appreciate all your time. I know you have been up late at night and early morning, maybe not even sleeping in the middle of the night, as you're trying to gather all the information that you can as you're faced with making a decision here in a week or so. I know that there were a lot of questions asked at the last workshop, and we have attempted to answer most all of those questions and want to provide you with those answers today as well, and continue to answer questions as we wade through various different options. We, as you also mentioned, as you continue to receive comments and questions from the community, those are also being synthesized in the form of us posting those onto our webpage so that we can keep at least the general theme. It may not be the exact question that one person asks, but there's oftentimes questions that are very similar to one another, and we're wanting to make sure that we capture that and place that on our website and in various other locations so that the community can kind of see the thought processes and the conversations along the way also. So with that, I know that there were a few specific questions that trustees asked at the last workshop, and what I think would be the best avenue for right now is just to kind of get going and get the ball rolling with the flow of information, is to address some of those questions. And I think the best way to do that is to see what might still be on the trustees' minds, and we'll start specifically there, and then move forward. So is there, as you've kind of reviewed some of the answers and questions of things that we've been trying to keep present for you, are there any clarifications or any additional questions that you can think of at this time that would help you as we work through the various conversations today?
Can I start with one that came up that was something that I haven't seen, and I'm not even sure exactly. It might have been Trustee Tenbrink that brought it up regarding the $3 million and how that impacts our budget.
It wasn't me, but I do have some questions about that as well.
Okay, could we start there, because I think that impacts a lot of things. So if that's all right, Shannon, maybe you could start. And I apologize, I don't remember the name of it. It was that holdover money that we were gonna.
Yeah. So last workshop, we presented bit of a legislative update. And there's 4 big impacts. One of those impacts was actually not for FY25, but for the current year. With the switch from enrollment to attendance-based funding, there was money left on the table with the K-12 appropriation from the state. And that amounted to about $140 million overall across the state. During this legislative session, they approved a supplemental appropriation to distribute $105 million of that $140 million back to the districts, recognizing that that's an appropriation that was approved, was budgeted for. They're going to give that to the districts on a one-time basis. Coeur d'Alene's portion is estimated to be around $3.1 million. And again, it's one time because now that the state has fully transitioned back to attendance-based support units, they have reduced their appropriation for next year. And because it's one time, we've recognized that with this kind of the unexpected deficit for this year, increasing expenditures, we really need to get to more of a healthy reserve level as well as a cash flow level. That $3 million would increase our fund balance to around, it's just shy of 10% estimated. Currently it's at about 6%. And that really means in reality, it covers a little more than 1 month of operating expenditures at that point. July is a tricky month for us as terms of cash flow. Remember, fund balance doesn't equal cash on hand, just the way we are distributed with or how we're getting our property tax allocation and our state revenue allocation, along with all our federal funds are on a reimbursement level. So we have to front the cash in those expenditures before we get those revenues back. So we really identified the national recommended reserve is to cover 2 months of your operating expenditures. We have some guarantees with funding. We're not experiencing any deferrals from the state like other states have actually imposed on their school districts. So for now, 2 months would be the goal, but at least 1 month would be a lot more fiscally responsible, safer. We can wear the storm of July cash flow, waiting for that property tax payment the property tax payment comes in on the last week in July. Payroll runs the week before. So that would be our recommendation. Just to give you kind of a comparison, I think Post Falls, their adopted budget was around 15%, Lakeland 12%. A lot higher percentages up north from us with Lake Pend Oreille because they have a permanent levy.
But Shannon, you said adopted budget. Do you mean their reserve fund is that percentage?
Yeah, from their FY24 adopted. Now, that's all the data I have to compare financials. Okay. So really it is, it's not, it's definitely still a very conservative reserve level at 10%, or at least a month of operating expenditures. So I can ask further questions on that as well.
So have we ever run into that as a problem before? Do we know? Have we ever had run dry on that?
No, we haven't. I have kind of gotten just prepared since FY or 2008, just seeing the reserve levels at right after, that crash. Our reserve levels were really low. And I know, former trustee Morris Rowe, he would kind of speak to that of our trend of our fund balance. It got to a point where it was really low, so the board made a commitment to try to boost those reserve levels and keep that commitment. But, we've never, since the 10 years, I haven't seen a temporarily, a tax revenue anticipation note or anything, but we want to prevent that and show our community that we're fiscally responsible. So, yeah.
And you'd mentioned a loan at that point in time.
Yeah.
What's the impact to the budget if we were to do that? We just have a short window.
Yeah, so I don't know what they're called here, but it's tax revenue anticipation notes. So it's kind of a loan anticipating that your property taxes are going to come a little late, so you need that temporary. We wouldn't have to have it for this year, but really running into next year, if we're operating a deficit and really if our reserves are pretty much at our contingency 5%, and our other funds are kind of our land fund is gone, which was kind of a helpful break on that. And as we continue to do facility projects and hopefully get our buses and get to actually pay for them, all those little emergency funds that we've kind of temporarily borrowed from, those are continuing to be diminished as well.
And we have to keep in mind as well, this budget that we are estimating for next year is based upon an enrollment estimation. If we come in under that again, there's an immediate loss of the dollars that we thought we would have. So we do our very best guess to plan for that enrollment. We would love to underestimate our enrollment so we get more than what we planned. But I don't feel confident to say that we're in that situation, and I feel we've done our very best work to create our estimate, but it wouldn't be way out if we underestimated our reduction, continued declining enrollment by some, and that would directly result in additional, in less dollars as well.
Do we have any, because we have surveyed some folks about coming back. I think our number was 340 for a very long time. Has any of the data that we've gleaned or any just feedback skew that in any way, or is it just kind of
in referencing the projected decline in enrollment?
Yeah.
No, we don't have any other updated projections.
Trustee Morris wrote that.
Yeah.
Hold on. There it is. Am I there yet? Yeah. Oh my God, I've done that twice now.
It's all right, Sean. Dr. Hawker.
Trustee McAndrew, we are in the process of verifying enrollment and taking that for this year. So it is a little bit early to be able to do so.
Shannon, I have a
Can I-
question about, oh, sorry, Leslie.
That's okay. It's going to be hard. It'll be hard
Yeah.
for me to jump in when I think
Yeah.
there's a pause.
Go ahead, because I want to switch to asking about cost of protection. So you go ahead.
Okay, well, this question, Shannon, did I hear you say our land fund, our reserves in the land fund are completely gone?
Yeah, the land fund was used to purchase the Cortair land.
Okay, so that's at a zero balance, correct?
Yeah, around there.
Okay, and do we have any assets right now that are not being used that we could possibly consider in our cuts, or has that been considered at all by anyone? I don't think that's something that we've really discussed.
No, we have not identified in terms of selling assets.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, we have not identified the sale of any asset right now to have a one-time revenue.
Okay, well, maybe that's something we could also look at.
Yeah, let me chime into that. I understand that that's been a comment or two that you may have received, but as the purchase of that land has come, over the many years, and you do own a couple of chunks of land, if you sell those, they're gone, and you get a one-time chunk of money. It cannot go towards ongoing expenses. It could only go to fix to do a one-time purchase of something or to come into the account one time. It's not ongoing funds. And you're right back in the situation now where there's no additional land within your boundaries to ever add another school down the road. So as you are tasked with projecting future growth within the district, you need to just be mindful of that need. That's why you've already bought that land. You've sold what you could sell, but you have what you have, and it would, I think it would be a grave mistake to sell that for one-time funds to address a one-time something. You'll be right back here next year having the exact same conversation as to what to do to align your budget. And you'd be without those assets ever again. And as we all know, land in another 5 years is never going to be cheaper than it is what you already own today as well. So it's really, I think, short-sighted to consider selling the land. And that's the only assets that we have that maybe could be a talking point. So that would be my answer to any patron who might be asking about selling an asset for a one-time help this year.
I was going to ask about protection. So like part of our deal this year was the cost of protection was higher than normal. Do you have an idea what we're looking at next year?
So they say it should go back to more of a normal. It was, 0.5% for a normal years. I still anticipate it may be a little higher. I've kind of estimated maybe a 1%, but we will not see those huge 4% cost of protection because we're no longer going from an enrollment to attendance-based funding formula. So,
And is that already accounted for in the budget projections?
I did account for it based off of my own thinking. Now the State Department of Education is still calculating recommendations. So we still have, a couple weeks of more budget updates and stuff. But for preliminary, I was a little conservative and at least took more than a 1% protection. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And so there's 105 is of the 140. So what happens to the other 35? Are there strings attached to that at the state level? They allocated 140.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So
Comment on
$20
that.
million is going to be invested in CTE funding. There's a lot of investing right now with that. And then $20 million is going to go into, it was the property tax relief facilities, House Bill 292, that lowers our bond levies at least for Coeur d'Alene. Other districts don't have levies, so they can use it for other purposes.
So Shannon, back then to that 3.1 million, and your job, I know, is to be conservative.
Yep.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm curious about moving from 6% to 10%.
Yeah.
And if there's room in there for us, given that we've lived in a 6% for a while now, and we want to move towards 10, 15%, but is moving from 6 to 10%, given our current financial reality, is this the year to have a 4% versus a 2% or whatever that percentage? As trustees, we would have freedom up here to decide about that. And
Absolutely.
right.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I would like to bring. I really need to get this budget updated so I can get you better numbers. But it won't be until May. I'd like to give you better ideas of cash flows as well. But we're in a holding period, right?
Yeah.
Worst timing ever to be able to do all this stuff. Yeah, I just would really recommend, it's not even about percentages. It's about what you can cover of your operating expenditures and having at least 1 month.
For sure.
Yeah, because, the recommendation is 2. I don't really foresee us getting there. But we're probably not going to be seeing these big one-time revenue streams coming in. It's kind of a saving grace. And with the projected enrollment just continuing to decline, this is kind of a one-time deal. So that would be my recommendation, but I need to give you better cash flows, and we need to wait for the budget so you can have some better ideas. Luckily, we don't have that $3 million in our pocket. That's just our estimate. It's going to take a couple more months. So really then you'll be able to decide what to do with that as well. So.
Okay. Thank you.
How are other districts in the same place having to pad their reserve with this one time?
Well, like I've given you some comparisons of at least our neighboring districts, and their reserves are a little healthier than ours. Now, I haven't really talked to fellow business managers about it. Really, more the focus has been on next year and that facility funding. So I don't know what kind of things they're doing, if they're doing investments. So I don't know how they're passing along that funds, but Idaho Falls, or if anyone saw that Idaho Ed News article, they're doing 4 million cuts. Nampa's doing some significant cuts, so I imagine they're probably holding on to some of that to weather the storms for next year.
Sure.
Thanks. Well, I started, so.
Keep them coming. We know you have lots of questions.
Well, I'll just start because I know that this has come through a number of times. Can you speak to the district office question out just publicly? And we get that question a lot, and cuts, and how I know it comes back to how things are coded. And whose administration, who is others that are in that building. And so could we just start that conversation? I think
We
that's
can,
important.
and I'd be happy to give a little overview. I know Eric Davis has even more deeper details, so we could certainly even just jump right into that. I think that's always a specific question. So Eric, what's your preference? How do you want to do this? Is it on? Okay, good.
Why don't you go ahead and give a summary, and then I can go into some details.
All right. In your questions, your answers that we're going to post and have those live as well, we've specifically identified, that there are 58 employees that work in the district office. Of those employees, 12 are what we will categorize as district department. There's 12 different departments in that district office, and that ranges from School Plus to communications to special ed and nursing and every operations in between. I could go over all 12, but they're listed there. Out of the district office, there are 14 administrators. There's 9 what we call the executive leaders. There are 2 department directors, and there are 3 department coordinators. That is the That's the staff there. So what is made up of that? Your coordinators are your nursing coordinators, your mental health coordinator, and your curriculum coordinator. Those are 3 individuals that coordinate, those specific departments and tasks and works. As far as department directors, you have your federal programs and assessments and your special ed. Those are your other 2 specific department directors. And then the other directors are either directors of communication, operations, tech, which tech is also tech, safety, and security, all 3 things, HR, finance, and then you have 2 assistant superintendents, 1 over elementary, 1 over secondary, 1 deputy superintendent, and myself. That's your organization. In regards to the district office, of those 58 employees, 44 of them are not directors or administrators. Okay, so there's another 44. It's also important to remember that there's 8.5 positions in that district office that are not related to your general fund expenses at all anyway. They are federal programs or Indian education, other specific grant funded positions that reducing those positions would not do anything to generate any cost savings to the general fund. And then overall, the last highlight, there's a few, I think the number's 1,480-ish, 1,490-ish employees in the district. And there are 48 different buildings, counting schools and ancillary buildings, throughout the building. So throughout the district. So I think it's very important just to keep that big picture. I know we always hear from lots of folks that just get rid of everybody at the district office and life would be good. Getting rid of people at the district office means payroll slows down, means HR operations slow down. All the essential functions that take place to have an employee organization of 1,500 employees, that's the ramifications. Well, that's the picture. Now, Eric, let me turn it over to Eric. He's got a great spreadsheet with even more details.
Well, I think what we want to keep in mind is the size and scope of the operation that we're talking about here let's put it into perspective. Almost 1,500 employees servicing 10,000 specific individuals with a number of different needs, and an entire community of patrons who are looking at this organization. This organization has a $100 million budget, and this is what is running the organization. We have a director, an assistant sup of elementary who oversees 11 elementary campuses and over 4,200 students in those 11 campuses. It's a big job. We have a director of secondary education, 6 campuses, over 5,000 students. We have a finance department that manages a $100 million budget with 5 employees. That's an AP, an AR, a purchasing, and then the assistant director and the director of finance. It does all of the financial work. We have 2 people in payroll cutting checks on the monthly for almost 1,500 individuals. 2 people. 1,500 people. We have a human resources department that has a specialist for certified employees who is taking care of over 700 employees, and a specialist in classified who's taking over 700 employees. We have a benefits director who does the benefits for all 1,000 plus individuals who have benefits, and we have an assistant director, and we have myself for 1,400 employees. And just to kind of give you an example, it's my department, so I'm kind of biased, but an HR generalist generally should have a caseload of between 400 and 500 people, and we have 700 on both of ours. Operations, Jeff Voller, who oversees all of transportation, maintenance, grounds, custodial, nutrition service, facility rental, and school plus, doesn't have an administrative assistant. He's a one-man show taking care of all of that out of the district office. And then there's community relations, who is doing all of our communicating, whether it's with media or social media, whether it's internal or external, all doing that with a department of 2. If you look at what is really administrating the district, and an organization of almost 1,500 people servicing 10,000 students in a community that is 80,000 to 100,000 people, depending on how far out you want to extend it, with a $100 million budget, I'm sorry, that is a pretty skinny district office when you look at it through those lenses. And then underneath that group, there comes people in technology and security, which I didn't even mention, that they're doing 18 different school buildings, 1,500 employees, some of them with multiple interfaces into the system, networks at every location, security at every building that we have, and they're doing it with a team of, I think it's 7 or 9 people across the district, and every student has a device as well. So it is a massive job, and I think, I don't want to toot our own horn, and I don't want to be terribly defensive, but in terms of administration of an organization, we are operating really, really skinny. So that would be my take on the whole thing, if you take into look the scope and size of the entire organization.
So how do we compare to comparable sized districts that are running on a similar budget and funding mechanism?
When you take a look at the senior leadership, there has not been a single addition to senior leadership in, I can't remember when the last one was. We actually went, it's been at least 5 or 6 or 7 years since we've added any. And when we compare across other districts, we compare 2 different things. We compare the number of people in positions to manage. There are some districts that do it with a little bit less. There are some districts that do it with substantially more. In our size group, we are average or below in terms of our staffing size. Also, when you take a look at that, you take a look at compensation. And when you take a look at compensation for the people in those positions, we are average or below in virtually all of them. So what that tells me, Allie, is that we're doing it with slightly less than the right amount of people, and the compensation is within line of what we would be happy. We don't want to be the district that.
With that compensation, are you including benefits received as well?
We're just the general overall whole package.
Eric, I would point out, I guess, too, because especially for those that have been in the district a long time, they might say, well, we didn't used to have 2 assistant soups. But really, even in my tenure now on the board, there was a just shuffling and renaming
Correct.
of positions. So it wasn't an additional position. It was a reorganization versus, suddenly you've added these extra.
Correct. It was a reorganization of
we just
positions. That's why.
reorganized, even at my time here. And
Yeah,
so
that's why
do want
I
to
say
point
we
that
haven't added, we have shifted and adjusted, but there's not a new position that has been added to that executive administrative team.
And I just like to continue to call out, this is possibly questioned by, community thinking that, this is leadership's comments, but you have also spent a lot of money 2 times and had a audit come into the district in 2009 and 2019. And both of those audits has clearly stated that's an outside agency, that is not anybody from this district doing that work, that your central office administration is understaffed. And that's all I can say. People can think and say what they want. It's not accurate. We are not overstaffed at the district office. We are understaffed at the district office.
I think what a lot of people see, though, is we want to keep this as far away from our kids in the classroom as possible and as far away from our teachers as possible. Wouldn't it make sense to start at the top, making the cuts with the people that are the farthest away from our kids?
And as we have said as well, the exact same comment, all of these decisions for our budget recommendations have done exactly that.
I think, I look at this. You run a lean. It's a lean operation from top to bottom. I mean, truly is. Every corner of it is lean, and it's certainly not a bounty on admin by any means. It just is. It's natural. People go after the people that are compensated the most, and they go after the people that they don't interact with. They don't want to go after the people that they don't want to question the folks that are helping their kids cross the street in the morning. They go after the kind of the folks that are a little faceless. I think what you just laid out was terrific. The folks out there just have data, right? And they can see that percentages have risen in, it's too bad that you just have this hodgepodge of people and you call them admin, or, before I got up here and looked at this, I didn't know what you meant when there's 56 people. So something's happened in the last 5, 6, 7 years where you have added team members, correct me if I'm wrong, and they become a portion of that piece. And we all think that they're down on whatever center, Northwood Court or whatever, as opposed to folks that aren't in an executive position. So can you speak to maybe those additions or why those percentages have risen like they have?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm working on a analysis too, to provide for you guys. Data, I love data because you can use it for any argument, and contradictory arguments, right? You can twist it. I think we're getting a lot of comments and a lot of great minds finally looking at the budget workbook, right? And our lovely state mandated template that has all the function codes, the program codes, and then our object codes. We have to follow a accounting code structure set by the state. And they tell us kind of what expenditures fit in these things called function and program codes. And there's 2 function and program codes in specific that people have really dialed into. They're the building administration function code and the district administration function code. What's hard to realize is there's accounting rules behind that. And for building administration, those aren't just your principals and assistant principals. That's all your office staff, because their services are directly tied to supporting building administration. And building administration doesn't just mean principals; it means helping operate that building. It's the administration. Think of administrative assistants. So you've got all that staff and their salaries, and some classified has gotten significant salary increases as well, right? And then for district administration, that's all your admin assistants in there as well, and anything that is any expenditure that is kind of housed at the district office. So I wish, we can provide our huge general ledger. It takes an accountant and not even an accountant, someone who's going to specialize in school finance and then learn how that state codes things to have a full understanding. But I'm trying to work on an analysis that shows FTE and salary increases so we can provide that to the community. Now, it's still not going to be pretty, it's spreadsheets, but I'll try to make it as user-friendly as possible. But there's just so much that goes into school finance, and we try to be as transparent as possible with the budget, but at the end of the day, that is an accounting report that with a lot of variables behind it, and it's not easy just to look at it and give an argument for it without knowing everything that goes behind what's in those big balances. So
and if I could just add real quick, just to try to create, I know this is being recorded and other people are going to watch this, and I like to make sure everybody can just kind of understand. When Shannon says that the data can be twisted, I want to be very clear that that's not us twisting the data. That is perhaps the viewpoint of some patrons in the community that are emailing the board and looking at data of percent increases for administration according to a code or something, and they're twisting the data. They're taking, first of all, when you have not very many administrators, we have less than 50 administrators in the entire district, and you add an office assistant, one office assistant could be an extra 2% increase, right there just by adding one staff member to that pool. And so I think it's just really, again, it's important to understand from an accounting perspective, which I am not an accountant either, the way the state codes things. The community can't just take a look and see a administrative code and automatically just go by the definition of that code has the word administrator, so it must be all principals, and you've grown your principals by 150% over the last 10 years. That is a twisting of the data. That is not accurate. It includes far more than just administration, as Shannon has shared, and includes support anything for an office in a building in a school, and that is why as workloads have increased and requirements have increased by the state, occasionally the district over the last 10 years has had to add additional assistance to account for certain things that the state makes us have to account for, and that can drastically skew that specific accounting code.
And then just because I know a lot of people are watching this, so it's a great platform to get information out. On our website, there is the Idaho State budget template, but starting last year, we created the budget book. And it's a lot of pages, and it's not a fun read, but if people are really interested in understanding what each function means and program and how much FTE are in there, I highly recommend they go to it. There a lot of the mystery gets taken away, and if they're interested in the budget, that's awesome. Please go to that, and we're going to continue to do the budget book, and I'm going to continue to try to get prior data in there as well. We had limited time last year, but just trying to get prior year FTE too for a comparison to get people more information so they can see the trends as well. That's definitely our goal, along with our Smarter School Spending program. So just a little marketing for myself with that budget
nice.
book.
Good, nice done. Before Leslie, do you have anything?
Yes.
Go ahead. Go for
Well,
it.
I do actually. I guess I would just say that emotions are high and running very raw right now. And yes, we are getting a ton of email, and I can only speak for myself, but I'm very grateful for those. People have really spent a lot of time thinking of solutions, things maybe we haven't thought of. So I'm very grateful for that. And although I probably haven't responded to most of you, it's just the large amount coming in. And I'm considering everything that is sent to me, and I'm sure you all are as well. But I would say that rather than just say the data is being twisted, a lot of it could be new and maybe not understanding all of it. I know some of the things like the coding, I had asked questions to Dr. Nelson a couple of days ago about how many employees we have in the district office, because honestly, I wasn't sure. And that's the first time I had been introduced to the way things were coded. So I would think that most of our community does not know that. So I think we just have to be very careful and understand that people are asking questions from their point of reference, and they don't know all the budget stuff. I don't even know all the budget stuff, and I've been doing this for a couple of years now. So I think we should probably try to be sensitive to that. And yes, data can be skewed. It can be skewed all over the place, but I just think that we just to be mindful. These are difficult decisions for everybody, that none of them are good. And I do have other questions, but I'll pause right now. I would like to later dig into the Bora recommendation of closure, but I'll wait a few minutes before I do that. So that's it. Thanks, Jimmy, for pausing for me.
I wrote a little note down for it because I do that all the time with Zoom calls and cut people off. So also just, it's like, it's not all twisted. Certainly there's a lot of people out there that are, but it's an elephant to put your arms around. So that's a great segue for an event tomorrow. If people want to come and talk about these things, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Do we want to follow up then? Are we ready to move on to, or do you have more follow-up questions right now for Shannon? Because then we'll go to Bora, since Leslie brought that up.
No, I just think that with all of these cost centers, I guess, that we have, we just want to make sure that we're being fair. Like it's cutting $1 is going to be difficult out of this budget. I really, truly believe that. And we want to make sure that we're making motions that are fair to everybody. And unfortunately, it's going to be brutal for everybody, and we just want to make sure that we're not skewing it in one space over another, which I'm not looking forward to by any means. But that's kind of why separating this out is so important for us to make.
And if I could just add, I appreciate that, and I appreciate Leslie's comment as well from the letters that the board continues to receive. They're all being reviewed and added. I think, again, I can only reiterate to the 5 trustees, I feel very fortunate to have a team in the district office and in an entire school system, whether it's principals or teachers or ancillary staff in any capacity. We're very fortunate to have, hundreds, if not thousands of years of educational experience to help lean on to make these very difficult decisions. And that's very beneficial in this specific time.
Leslie, do you want to lead us into the discussion then, maybe about Bora, if we're ready to maybe?
Sure. I think I'm just gonna have whoever wants to delve into this. It was recommended at the last board meeting that Bora is the school that we are looking at repurposing and moving those students. And I guess I would just, because I've heard so much from the Bora community as well as staff, understandably, they're all very upset by this proposal. Why, or if it had been, let me think if I can formulate this in a coherent way. There's 3 other schools, as far as I can tell, that have similar population, schools, number of students, close to that side of town: Bryan, Sorensen, and Bora. And I know that Bora, I visited there multiple times. It's a wonderful school, and there's a lot of our students there that are very vulnerable. So I'm wondering why Bora ended up being the one. And I know you talked about it at the last board meeting, but I would like that revisited, like really clarify the thought process on why Bora was the choice, the recommendation for the one that we're thinking about closing and repurposing. I think it would help to have some clarity for all those that will be watching this or who are watching now to kind of have that explained, and maybe it'll give them a peace of mind, maybe it won't, I don't know, but I would like to dig into that a little more if somebody would like to address that.
Thanks, Trustee Berkey. This is Patty Morrison. And so I guess I'll just start with what was shared last time to remind us all that you're correct. We did look at our smaller enrollment schools because that's the very first thing we looked at is, do we have too many schools for the amount of students that we've lost? Our enrollment has declined, and by fall it will be over 1,000 students at the elementary level. So that was the beginning point of just considering this. And you're also absolutely correct. We've listened all week, and we are also considering everything we're hearing, not only from our community members and those parents, and a sweet little girl on the news that I heard speaking so wonderfully, the feelings that people are having, but also the Bora staff. So have met with them and hearing just their thoughts about seeing their wonderful work now pushed into other school buildings, and the culture of Bora taking on just a different role, the facility anyway. So the decision really was about narrowing down to the 2 smallest schools and taking Sorensen out of the picture because we do have them as a magnet school, looking at a waiting list of over 100 students. So that was really the beginning of that with Sorensen, although we have talked and considered different ways to enlarge and think about Sorensen and that beautiful community in a different way. But that building is a big part of what is making Sorensen very successful with the arts and humanities and the community partnerships that have been built there over time. So we didn't just not consider them, we most certainly have. We're also looking at a long game here. If the community of Coeur d'Alene continues not to have people come here with young children, and is there a possibility that we may need other closure in the future, then these are just the hard decisions we have to make as our community changes. But that left us with 2 other schools with the location in that eastern side and more central side of the district, knowing that we wanted to repurpose a school building. So we narrowed down to Bora and Bryan Elementary, both very close in numbers. At the time, we were looking at 304 students at Bora and 270 at Bryan. And so as we discussed, we just realized that we do like that location for busing kids right off, and for our parents as well to be able to access that building, for our buses to be able to come right off of the highway very quickly, for our preschool parents, and then some of the other ideas we've talked about, also increasing revenue, maybe as a daycare for our staff and offering that and having people come from all over the district before they try to get to work easily. That was one consideration. And so those are the two main reasons: the enrollment of those schools, and then narrowed down to the two, and then the location in the end about Bora, having nothing really to do with the difficult decision about people keep mentioning some of the parts of that school is a fragile community of kids. I actually see incredible resilience there, and I also know that we have trained every school building to have the same skill level that that wonderful staff has. That staff is going to move into other buildings ready to support any of the kids that are in those buildings, including these wonderful Bora kids. I would say that at a poverty rate of 56% presently in March, we have Winton Elementary at 54%. So I guess I would want to raise that awareness that we have several of our schools that are over 50% poverty rate. Bryan is at 50% in March. So, but these are not necessarily negatives in any way. These are things that we have really built strongly into every one of our schools. So that's where I guess I would start, and then take any questions from there.
Thanks. Questions? Or
It's not so much a question. I mean, regardless of what school looks at being repurposed, we're going to have some people whose hearts are broken. I mean, it's just the truth of the matter. And we haven't decided to do any of this. It's just numbers that are on the sheet, and we have to balance it. But just my little math here: if you weren't to use Bora as the example, it looks like you're going to have to absorb kids somewhere, right? So when I look at this math, those schools are pretty close. I don't know if they're the closest to each other, but they're pretty close to each other. But it looks to me like off of their peaks, Bryan has 142, the potential to absorb 142 kids, whereas Bora is only 48 off of its peak. Does that make sense?
Thank you. That is something I keep failing to mention. That was another piece of that. Bryan is a bit larger in capacity.
Just the sheer of, as far as, let's just say you got 300 kids that got to find a new school. This allows them to be closer to that one and open up more doors. Again, everybody's going to be impacted in this, but it's less slicing and dicing and rearranging. Is that accurate?
It is, and preliminary numbers are looking at 109 of the Bora students moving to Bryan. We like to keep a little capacity for more kids that may move in, and it is hard to project right now who's buying our houses and if they are bringing kids with them, young kids. We're looking at 77 at this point going to Ramsey and 34 to Fernan. So those are preliminary numbers.
I mean, Ramsey has the most capacity from where they were on their all-time highs. It's just they're kind of out by themselves, right? I mean, across town. So it's less efficient and probably less effective to shuffle that around just by, pure disruption to people's lives.
Exactly. Really, really literally looking at those streets in those neighborhoods and what's the best way to keep neighborhood kids together. If you decide to have us make these moves.
with moving some students to Ramsey, does that put us back in portables?
No.
Okay.
No, their total would be 492 with these projected moves, as well as we know at this point. And their capacity at 90% is 506. their full capacity with portables is 728.
I guess it kind of begs the question, though. We do have a waiting list of 100 for Sorensen, and again, I don't have any ideas or anything about that. But what were some of those discussions about that? What did that look like? Because 100 kids, I mean, I hate to say this, but 100 kids is like $500,000 how the state funds it, right? So,
Well, let's remember that we are
or are they
anticipating
within the district?
Yeah, most of them
Okay.
were within the district on
Okay,
waiting
sorry.
lists, so it would just be
That
a
makes sense.
shuffle. But we anticipate there could be 10 or 15 that would
Okay.
maybe be out of district.
Okay, because I'm like, if there's 100 kids out of the district, like, what do we got to do?
And what it could do is open up, seats under current law with open enrollment. It could open up seats in other schools that people do want to go to. Maybe they're in private school or homeschooling and they want to come back to us. So that's a discussion we've had. It is a little bit of a shell game, and it's hard to project, what would happen if we tried to do that, make a different facility, for example.
So if we were to take those programs that we have at Sorensen and the teachers that we have at Sorensen and push those out into the district in other schools, allowing more space for more kids to be able to come in, is that a possibility that we can look at?
I think all possibilities are open right now because we're making difficult decisions, for sure.
I think it creates the ability to create a little more desirability at other schools as well. If there's kids that are waiting to get into those classes and those programs, then we could absorb them and increase our funding.
Yeah, I'll add that I've had multiple conversations with administration from Sorensen to have this specific conversation. One option that we spent a lot of time evaluating is the repurposed school could become the new Sorensen. It's got a bigger footprint, so instead of having 2 sections at Sorensen for each grade level, you could have 3 by just simply moving Sorensen a mile or 2 down the road to one of those other 2 schools that you've already mentioned. That was a long conversation. And to Mr. Depew's credit, he took that conversation even further and met with his advisory teams and committee members, which are made up of staff as well as patrons, and really did a lot of work and effort in that conversation. The end result, just to those possibilities are always there, and so we've discussed breaking Sorensen and having maybe K1 and 2 at one school and 3, 4, 5 at another school, right? We've discussed a plethora of options so that perhaps we could open those doors even further for 100 more kids that we know are on a waiting list, and maybe even more. There's a lot of work in that, and that door is continually open. I think for me the biggest concern or challenge that we have not been able to identify is that the functions of Sorensen, and some of you that are very familiar with Sorensen can add to this, please do, but the functions of Sorensen require a significant amount of parent time commitment, financial commitment. Of all the elementary booster programs, Sorensen may very well top all of them combined. I guess I don't know those numbers. Those are finances outside of the operations of the district. But there's concern from the groups that if you enlarge Sorensen by 50%, 100%, is there the community resource growth proportionally? Can you tap the community to continue to provide the resources that Sorensen are needing to fulfill their mission of their magnet school and their focus on arts and humanities? Can that happen? And we were unable to identify whether that door is wide open at this juncture, and so we said that's a conversation that we need to continue to have, but it's not something that we could address at this juncture to meet our pending budget concerns for this next year.
I would be interested to seeing that conversation continue, though I understand timeline-wise the issues there, but I think it's worth, if we have more kids that want to be there, it's worth
Thank you for that. And I think
trying to open that up.
the administration and the folks that we have spoken to, anytime you have a top 10 performing school district in the state, or school in the state, it's very important to try to figure out how to scale that and how to create additional opportunities from that. So that makes great sense. There's so much to that in this specific scenario that as Patty has shared, Sorensen ended up being removed from the list, and then that really left a couple schools, and really for me the decider was what you just have mentioned. Bryan has a larger footprint that can absorb more students, and they're 1 mile away, and so it gives an opportunity for students to still have those neighborhood connections, which parents really value, to create that community and that culture within their schools. So that became a slight tipping point. As you guys have all mentioned, none of these decisions are easy. They're all tough and challenging for any campus that you might consider to repurpose for a while. But we felt like this one was the just slightly better than other options and made the most sense.
So what is the percentage of students at Sorensen that are from outside of the zone for Sorensen, like the community zone? I know we have a lot of students that come from different areas in the district that if they were to be dispersed would actually just end up back at their home schools. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
I'll have to find out. I don't know that right now, but I'm writing it down to find out.
And Ramsey's the same way, right? So Ramsey's the same, consideration. So we did specifically discuss, all of that. But we're also recognizing that, although our current enrollment numbers do suggest that perhaps we should move from 11 elementary schools to 10, and better align with where the district was at 15, 20 years ago with those enrollment numbers, you want to be mindful. If you close a large school campus and shuffle those kids, you're really creating a challenge, and most of the growth in Coeur d'Alene is on the west side of town. So as schools approach the west side of town, they become a little less desirable, I guess, if you will. Not desirable is the wrong word, but a little lower on the list for potential repurposing, because they get closer to the growth within the district. And we definitely know that growth is coming. It's just not here today.
What's that? Leslie?
Yes.
Any?
Oh, I didn't say anything. I was just listening. Yeah, thank you,
Jimmy's
Patty,
on it.
too, for that explanation.
He's reminding me. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Trustees, is there another topic? I think we need to, at some point here, talk schedules. And so, or follow up on that, or?
I've gotten a lot, I'm sure you guys have too, about the district office building itself, about Midtown. What else was it that I was hearing about? Basically, that I know we've talked about how uncomfortable it would be to disperse those from the district office into maybe our schools for offices instead, or have to telecommunicate with each other, even though if you wouldn't necessarily be in the same building. We've talked about how uncomfortable it would be to hold our meetings as a board in auditoriums or gymnasiums. But I think if we're looking at all these cuts that we're going to have to be able to get a little uncomfortable and deal with that. Have we looked at what the cost savings would be if we sell the district office, if we sell Midtown, and use our school facilities that we have where there are open classrooms, where there is open space that's not going to cost us any extra money, and utilize that?
Yeah, if I'll start, and then everybody else can kind of chime in. And absolutely, we've looked at all of those options. The district office is owned; it is not rented. There are no expenses for that that we pay on a monthly basis outside of utilities, as normal as a owner. I think it's really important for our community to continue to hear selling an asset and using those to take care of a budget deficit is a one-time, short-term solution. It does not address long-term scenarios. So it could address something for 1 year. It could kick the can down the road to next year, but next year you're right back in these meetings having that same conversation. With that said, as Shannon has shared, our reserve account is below optimal as it is. There will be expenses to renovate any school into a functional district office space where HR and payroll and things can have confidentiality and private conversations with employees that are demanded and required by law. There are renovation expenses, and although we have not gone out to a bid to ask what those are, my estimation would be millions of dollars to renovate a school and turn that into a functional office space for those kinds of privacy, scenario purposes. And unfortunately, the only way to get that money would be to sell the district office and use those funds to renovate the school. And there's a transition time, in place to do that as well. And then, so that's I think a big piece. This property, and I know Mr. Voller's here and could specifically address as well. There is some value to this specific building, but the value of this building really comes from moving the entire campus, moving maintenance someplace else too, and selling this whole block. And that's not on the docket. We don't have the funds to buy any property and do anything different for that. And so really all you'd be looking at is possibly selling this building, as it currently sits. And I don't know what that may be worth. I've not asked a realtor for that question. We have had conversations with realtors on specifically selling specifically selling the district office building. I was curious, if you were going to get $10 million out of selling that building, maybe that can go 5 years down the road of helping $2 million a year, right? And it's certainly something to consider, but it's not that much. The anticipation of the revenue that would be generated from selling the building would be a couple $1 million, $1.5 to $2 million is what we anticipate that building being worth. And in fact, the realtor would suggest, as I might, you'd probably be better off to rent all 3 floors out to become a landlord and just rent the space. And we anticipate you could get somewhere between $130,000 to $150,000 a year in rental income coming in for owning that building. But again, it's going to take you, many years of saving up that $150,000. It might take you 10 years to get $1.5 million to have enough money to renovate a high school into a functional office space. So without that as an option, another consideration could be to sell the district office and then just relocate back out into lots of different smaller spaces across the community. And that's how this district did operate for a long time. And it was evidenced that was more expensive than having everybody brought in under one roof. So I think that's one of the perceptions that the community has still continued to struggle with, is that, perhaps 10, 20 years ago when we were not located in that district office, they didn't know how many different offices were running all over town to have different things going and the costs associated with that. And now they just see one building where there's, 50 employees that work out of there most days. And it creates the perception that you've got this, grandiose building. But Jeff, do you want to add anything to that?
Good morning, trustees. I'm on? Okay, there you go. Good morning, trustees. I think Dr. Hawker did a nice job of explaining that. I think a couple things I would just add and reiterate is that, the facility that we're in right now is all part of the larger maintenance facility, right? And so to do that, we would have to basically parcel off, so it would be a little kind of carve out if we were to sell Midtown of that, because we still fully operate the maintenance facilities, the book warehouse, and the storage warehouse across the street as well. I took some time and looked at utilities. The utilities that we pay to run Midtown are about $600 a month. So not a lot of cost savings in terms of, the operating expenses for this building, because this one is metered separately, so we can track the utilities of this directly. Compare that to the district office, it's about $2,000 a month to run the district office. And compared to an elementary school, on average, the elementary schools are around $5,000 to $7,000 a month in utilities that we pay for those different facilities. So, I just wanted to kind of add some of those facts to the conversation.
One big question I would have about that scenario is building security. We've worked really hard on making our school campuses a lot more secure. Would that factor into dispersing district employees? I mean, because people come to the district office. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering.
And there's a lot of collaboration that happens in the district office as well, right? Between, the different departments. And, I can tell you for myself, I move around that district office all the time to meet with finance, to meet with HR, to meet with, the teams upstairs. There's between those different departments, we collaborate so much, and that, the consistency that we have there to have everybody housed in that facility, you definitely lose those efficiencies when you're dispersed and, you spend a
I
lot of
think
time
too, let
traveling
me
to
add
transition.
that, just so the community can be reiterated, the picture of an elementary school or any school, quite frankly, there is very limited existing office space in any of those schools as it is. I think many of our principals that, I know there's one here today, would just attest, there's just not, office space. Mr. Bankston's here, his office isn't even in the office. So there's just not office space in our school. So what you would be doing again is needing resources to renovate classrooms into office spaces. And the challenge, I guess, with that is that nobody needs an entire classroom for an office. That would be way too huge. You've got to break that up. And in many of our departments within our district office, especially HR, maybe finance, benefits, special education, there are private conversations that have to take place. You've just got to create a private environment, and we are lacking the resources to be able to do that. So it's like that chicken and an egg. If we sold the district office, we might have some resources to do something, but then you'd be back to renting that space back from the owner for a period of time while you use those dollars to renovate something, and now you're having less dollars to renovate whatever that is, and it's not an efficient function. I've renovated elementary schools in my background and turned them into district offices and other functional space outside of a school, and it can be very expensive if you choose to do it the way that most would maybe like to use. We just are facing those challenges across the entire district. The board is very well aware that right not very far from here in our transportation department, our restroom facilities are not what they need to be for our transportation and bus driver services, and yet the funds to renovate those things, it's just very expensive. So you can only imagine an elementary school, if you choose to, you don't have to, but if you choose to take out the first grade kindergarten bathrooms that are 1 foot off the ground and turn those into adult restrooms, it's just very expensive.
Sean?
Yes.
Just a quick question. Is our district office at 100% capacity, meaning every bit of space is currently utilized?
That's a great question, and I'm going to answer and just say yes. Could we fit a few more people in a cubicle in a hallway or something? Yes, we have a reception area that you've walked through yourself up on the 3rd floor on your way to my office that right now is empty. We have, in fact, we have used that space for the last year plus or so, renting it out to the hotel management next door in the Marriott because their building went way behind, and we generated a few $100s a month.
That's what I was going to suggest. If it wasn't full, could that not perhaps be a revenue stream to sublet some of whatever available spaces?
No, that's great. Thank you for that. And yes, we did do that this last year. They just barely moved out, so it's now empty. And we certainly would be happy to rent that one little section to anybody that would need a little space. But outside of that, the rest of the office is very much at capacity. And I think also, let me just go on record to say, I know there's been a lot of conversations of maybe doing away with the district office. I want to be clear that the superintendent has no love for that office any more than the next person. The parking is really bad in that office, and 9 times out of 10, as trustees, when you come, you're lucky if you can find a spot in the parking lot. You usually park down the road a long way. So lots of times when we have team meetings, there's professional development groups that come in, administrative groups that might come in. They're parking clear down the road, long ways away in the cul-de-sac and walking in. And so it's not like we love that office and we just are doing everything we can to stay there. I could speak for myself without polling anybody in the office. We'd be happy to go somewhere else. The challenge is the costs associated with doing that are prohibitive at this time. And so we're trying to just make that office work for our current needs.
And the HVAC system is a mess in that office.
So I guess I'm going to go back to that being uncomfortable point again. I know you talk about the privacy of departments and being able to talk amongst themselves, and maybe a classroom's too big for one office, so you need to have several people in there. Well, then a whole department maybe could fit into a classroom, and can't they close the door and have a private conversation? I know that's going to get asked of me from the public. I'd like to know why that couldn't happen.
It depends on the department. I mean, I will share with HR, when you have a Title IX complaint, the person that's coming in to have that conversation is demanded privacy. So there has to be a complete floor-to-ceiling, walled-off private area for those kinds of conversations. When parents come in and have conversations about discipline with their students or special ed needs for their students, the same kinds of things exist. So there are many departments that just require that as a function. Do all departments have to have that? No, not at all. So I don't want to paint that picture, but there are enough that it creates a significant remodel of a classroom, because there are only 4 walls and there are only outlets on those exterior walls in our current classrooms. When you divide those walls up, or those rooms up into other offices, create little ways to get into other offices without walking through somebody else's office, and you're basically designing all these little hallways and stuff without getting all that detail. It requires new power runs, it requires new venting and AC scenarios. It can be very expensive. On top of, just as I said, the restrooms, for instance, in elementary schools, other than a few single stall adult bathrooms for faculty, they're built for kids. They're built for kids. So can staff use them? Sure, and it's happened before. But again, we're right back to the same conversations that your transportation department have, inadequate restroom facilities. So when you look at the whole picture to say, okay, what could we do? Yes, we can choose not to remodel bathrooms. I'm just sharing that as an example. But there would be a need to create some office spaces with privacy, and there would be a need to make sure that we have the proper outlets and internet feeds and all that other updates that would have to happen. And with any schools, when you go through a significant remodel, that can open up Pandora's box. There can be lots of other there could be asbestos that immediately has to be abated the minute that you touch the school. There are lots of conversations of things that can add to those costs.
The only thing I'd add on there, so what percentage of that building, if these plans took place, how much of it does Early Learning Center take up? Is it 50%? Yeah.
Repurposed building?
Yeah.
Of moving the early learning,
Yeah.
we have approximately 90 students in the early learning center. So that
It's
would
about a third of what's being taken up right now, or a fourth of it.
yeah.
Okay. So you got to take that. The nice thing is, dollars wise, that $150,000 is immediate. I mean, we flip off the switch and we get to receive those. You could be trying to lease that entire building out for 3 years and not see a dime. I mean, all of this is hopefully a short-term solution. So I would certainly, if we were going to look at that, I would be way on board with renting it out as opposed to selling it. But we could be a year before we receive any funds from trying to rent out that beast in this commercial real estate market. So, but it's still, again, it's all about uncomfortable is uncomfortable. All this is uncomfortable. So we just want to make sure we're looking under every nook and cranny, I think.
Keeping it as far,
Yeah.
and keeping it as far away from our students as possible.
Right.
If it's the rest of us that have to absorb it, I'd much rather. If I had a salary to give up, I think we'd all be willing to give up something.
Right.
So can we shift the conversation then to school calendar, just and see what pieces and conversation we need to discuss regarding that, since that's the other, I mean, that's a big chunk of this discussion. So I don't know where we want to go with that. I don't have a thought on that. Is there questions that I appreciate Stephanie sent us this morning in our email an article on where the state Department of Education is going this next year in their, I mean, they're researching, digging in themselves. And so there is a lot of data that is almost unknown. I appreciated for myself Mike's data last week on what high performing schools throughout the state, what schedules they are, and where our kids are at. So I'll start with that.
The one I had, I don't know if that question got answered, but we had that slide about the top 50. I don't know who I should be asking this question, Dr. Nelson. So we had the top 50, and we saw that the larger concentration for the top 50 with the public schools were on the 5-day week. Did I interpret that correctly?
Trustee McAndrew, yes, you did do so.
And so, and in my little pea brain, I know that 90 plus of our districts out of 115 are on a short week. Everybody follow me? Right
Not
now?
of 115, Trustee McAndrew. That's counting charter, so you're closer to probably 179,
Okay.
80-ish
Okay.
total
So-
overall
so
charters
about
and
half and
districts.
half.
So
Half and half.
that is correct. It's 96, I believe,
Okay.
is the
Correct.
number.
It's,
Okay, so that actually makes that data pretty reliable then. Is where I'm going with that then. Because I was using the number of 115, thinking if that larger of a percentage were on 4-day, then, but I think that's a pretty good reflection of what's going on then. So that has to be taken into consideration by us. I will say that I've spent, I don't know, 10 hours researching this, and it feels pretty inconclusive out there. And just like you said, Shannon, I mean, you set yourself up to see what you want to see with regards to a lot of this data. So I can only speak for myself. I can't tell you if a 4-day, if there's any betterment or worsening with student achievement, because the data out there, it just seems to be contradictory. That's the tough part in all this, because we're trying to make a decision based upon student achievement, number one. Everybody in this room believes in that, right? That's why y'all get up in the morning. So it's just hard. We know the cost savings, but at what cost? So that's what I wrestle with every single day. And I would think it goes without saying that the feedback that we get, I believe your vision for the hybrid, and that's what was proposed to us. There's definitely validity in that. If it's with the intent of increasing achievement, it just seems like it's a dud out there, PR wise, or with the community. I hate to put it that way, but people are in one camp or another right now, 5 days or 4 days, and it's just hard to. I just don't want to sacrifice student achievement for any dollar amount. That's, I guess, a comment. But if anybody has just the most rock solid evidence and the report of all reports or survey, please send it to us, because we would love to receive that.
I also think there could be some really great things from the 5-4 schedule. But, from our parents and our staff, they all are real worried about consistency, and I get that. So for that reason, I really am leaning towards staying on a 5-day week, which does have the unfortunate side benefit of not having any cost savings. But I feel like this is a decision I really have to make primarily thinking about achievement, not budget. So that's kind of where I am in this decision. And if we were going to stay on a 5-day week, I would be interested in maybe a slight modification, of course, change from late start Monday to whatever time we think will work better for collaboration. And also, figuring out some other ideas for professional development time that require fewer subs, because that's part of our cost savings as well. I don't know if we just go with exactly the calendar we have had the last couple of years, but maybe we are, based on a 5-day week with a few modifications.
I think there are some things I too have struggled looking back and forth, and I'm with all of you in that student achievement is our primary goal. So what can we make a decision on that is not going to harm our students? So this one's a tough one because there is not really any conclusive evidence long term. I think short term, some people that are on the 4 days say, yes, it's better for the kids. Yes, it's better for families. Yes, it's better for retaining staff. There is some short-term data that says that, but I don't think there is anything rock hard, like you said, for long-term. And I'm also, something else I've been thinking about is that if we were to go to that 4-day schedule, is that something we would be locked into forever, that we would never be able to go back should our circumstances improve? So that's something I also think about. And then I think about, too, more teacher contact time is probably better for students, the consistency. The hybrid, to me, is a no-go. People don't want it. That is the bulk of primarily a lot of our email, but just people I see on the streets and talk to, that is just not something. And it seems like it would cause almost further problems with the back and forth, harder to find consistent child care. I think a half day on Friday would be too easy to blow off if you wanted to go someplace for the long weekend. So I think that one also has a lot of unintended consequences. So I struggle with the 5-day probably is best. However, I think there are some things that we could do with PLC training. What is maybe have one Friday a month on the 5-day schedule that's dedicated to teacher training, PD, whatever you want to call it. Maybe one Friday a month, and then the kids would have a 4-day that week, maybe once a month. So that's just something I've been toying around with in my head. But I think there's lots of avenues we could go, and I think there's probably some room to improve on either the 5-day that we currently have or a 4-day perhaps. So that's kind of where I am with that.
I wanted to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, and I've kind of been toying with the idea too of having that maybe if we were able to do one Friday where there was some PD that was able to happen, some PLC work, but also use that time for students that need remediation and work on that part of our plan as well. Then we still have students in classes, we still have students in, but then some will have that freedom to have that extra day off if they want.
Well, and since we've all kind of shared, I some know this. I've wrestled with the 4-day for a couple different reasons, especially after I heard Eric talk about the classified staff impact. And to double reduce both salary and insurance right now, that took my breath away. And then second, the academic achievement piece, because it's so unclear. And a number of people have said, well, Post Falls has figured it out. Well, but we don't know the academic achievement yet in Post Falls. And to anecdotally talk to some teachers who say, I'm still working just as hard, even if harder, because I'm still putting everything into 4-day. 4-day has some benefits, absolutely. And I know school districts have figured it out, but I'm not in a position right now to make that drastic of a shift for our students here. But we would need to know, I mean, it is that 400, if we left it 5-day a week, is that 400,000 numbers and I hope I'm looking at the same page. We've seen a couple of the budget templates. Is that $400,000 still our target number that we need to hit to stay on our five day? Which brings me back then to the first question that I had regarding that initial 3 million. So, yeah. So Shannon.
Yeah, you might have to help me re-summarize, but so yeah, the 160 day, it's what people kind of refer to the hybrid. That's the 400K savings. So not going to that option as well. That would be unchecked, and then you would have to reprioritize. So
I guess my question is, and I know your job is to be conservative. We hired you to be conservative. But, the administrative recommendation includes a surplus, a projected surplus of about $1 million. And I understand that's there because we don't know for sure, all the unknowns.
yeah.
But, we could have a surplus of 700,000.
Yeah, the board can decide on whatever surplus they would feel comfortable with. We would just really need to watch unexpected increases and be able to balance that way, knowing it either have to come from a fund balance or we would have to repurpose and something else throughout the year. And yeah, it's risky right now. There's just so many unknowns. It's not pre-COVID where you could have a 5-year average budget, roll it over, and be pretty on the spot. So yeah, it's just risk assessment.
Yeah.
How much pressure on the state would there need to be to really, and I know that is an unknown question, but if the state continues to fund on attendance versus enrollment, I mean that continues to be on a bigger picture question here, where the pressure maybe needs to be to really. Idaho funds an okay
I'll address
education,
that real quick.
but we in Coeur d'Alene provide a great education and have for years, and so I just need to say that out loud.
Well, and thanks for saying that. And I'll just add, I believe Superintendent Critchfield put forth a very concerted effort to address that this session, and it did not go anywhere. So obviously you can't predict the future, but I do not think in any immediate future that's going to get rectified. So we're going to be funded on attendance, and that's a big component. So I think it's fair to share that an option the board could consider with the earlier conversation we had today of taking the district's portion, the $3.1 million of the $105 million the state's going to give back to schools and one-time funds only. And our recommendation is to move that into our district reserves, increasing us from about 6 to just short of 10%, which is getting us closer to our target. There's Shannon's right that our $1 million surplus in our budget plans is a very skimpy reserve of a surplus. It would be probably best practices for that number to be closer to 2% each and every year, because we just you can't take a $100 million budget and realistically be within a few dollars.
Right.
So we do the best we can with estimating. But an option it could be to remain on that 5-day schedule, and that removes, if you remember in our last spreadsheet, we had the 160-day calendar as an option, and for all the same reasons that we've just talked about today. That was a middle ground approach to create still some savings, but also still have a vast majority of our employees that are service provided directly to our students remain benefit eligible, a lot more than would have if you chose to move to a 4-day, and those employees provide a big service directly to students. So as we're trying to make all these decisions based on students, that's how the 160-day came about. But if you choose to just remain in the 5-day, and we can tweak the calendar to maybe meet some specific better time for collaboration than the Monday late start and some things like that. We certainly can get to work on that. If you unclick that button, and then if you also kind of unclick, the very last phase 4, staffing scenario reduction, you're still sitting about a little less than $400,000 on the good. I think you'd be recognizing that it's very likely that you'd have to use some of your surplus funds to balance the budget next year as we start, because we just can't predict our expenses that tightly. But it could create a pathway forward and remain on a 5-day schedule. You're aware that the community seems to be, based on the responses, about split between wanting that 4-day, wanting that 5-day. I think your staff are much more leaning towards the Post Falls 4-day. I know Lakeland's looking at the 4-day, but not for next year, but very likely down the road. I think it's just a conversation that's going to continue to resonate out there, simply because I could argue that Idaho only funds schools to operate about 4 days a week. So that's why we're so heavy leaning on our supplemental levy, which it will also have to be discussed and presented to the community soon.
Great points.
And the state of education, even today, said they're going to do that work this next year, right? To evaluate that. The State Board of Education is going to do that work. And so I would like to see them do that work. Yeah. And then I think that gives us information.
The couple of things, because I love all of that. Devil's advocate, though, inflation is starting to, numbers and reports are starting to look like what we feel when we go to the grocery store, and it could get squirrely. And so we are sitting up here because of that. You know what I mean? So I just think we got to be mindful. We've got to have some serious guardrails in place when it comes to budgets you've done great with our working budget. It's almost like you need a daily working budget. Literally, right? So we just got to we have to be ultra cognizant about that. The surveys that we got, they were great. I do want to make a point of clarity. I had asked some of those responses to be stripped out with staff, parents of kids in the district that all that work for us, and I think I got a couple of responses. So I just want to, I want to clarify my position there. It wasn't to belittle or demean any responses by staff who also have kids in the district. My hat's off to them. They're they're double dipping in my mind on the hardest job out there. So that was more so just to isolate the people out there that wouldn't be on the same schedule as their kids. That was the effort there, and to find out how many truly kids are we talking about that might be in front of a screen all day on Friday or without their parents on Friday. So again, the survey results were overwhelming, but I think there are some holes in it, and for those reasons, that's why I'm struggling with it so much. So sorry for using up that time. I just wanted to clarify that.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, for sure.
In the 4-day schedule, I think we briefly touched on this before, but just to refresh my memory, have we talked about if we were to go that route, that Fridays, maybe there would be opportunities for maybe some intervention work or something that would be available to students for that, probably that kind of work really, but some kind of work would there be? Have we discussed any of that? And if so, would that then take away from the savings that we're trying to incorporate into our budget? So
yes, Trustee Bierke, that's
does
exactly.
that make sense? I mean,
it
I'm
does.
just like kind of trying trying to think all this through. I mean, I think even on a 4-day schedule, there could be, again, some opportunities for kids on a Friday. I think it was mentioned that that was thought about, but we really haven't gone any place or explored that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Trustee Berkey. You're right. The more staff that you bring in on that Friday, the more expenses are going to go up. That's just how that's going to work. We would rely heavy on outside services on that day for supplemental support to students that might need it. That's the plan currently in place to identify that roughly $1,000 or $1 million savings on a 4-day week. Outside of that, your teaching staff and your professional staff, they're not available on those Fridays in our current model on those cost savings functions, because that would be their professional development day. One of those Fridays was built into their schedule so that because of their extended work days, Monday through Thursday, they would not report on one Friday a month, and the other 3, I believe the schedule, they would report for.
But we could tweak that rather than having PD every 3 of the 4 Fridays, consolidate that into perhaps one Friday a month, and maybe that second Friday could be used to work in their classroom, provide assistance to kids that need that extra assistance. I mean, these are all ideas that I think as a former classroom teacher could be explored and utilized.
No,
and
you're right. I
still
mean, there's
have
lots of options.
savings.
There's lots of options, but the professional learning communities recommendations, nationwide recommendations that come from Solution Tree and even the higher liable schools, Marzano recommendations, staff should be participating in professional learning community driven work at least every 6 days. So that was one of the downsides to the 4-day week in my mind, is that you're not as academically set up for success if you're only asking your teachers to do that work once a month. Twice a month would be a bare minimum, but the recommendation is every 6 days, which is virtually every week. And in our proposal, we had created that 3 out of the 4 Fridays would be, driven that work. So we're just trying to again keep our focus on that strategic plan and student achievement, and not jeopardize that. But based on what I'm hearing today, I know there's lots of conversations about the 4-day, and there are lots of folks that love it and lots of folks that don't. And I think that this district's been used to all of those kinds of conversations, whether it's block schedule or traditional schedule. It's always about 50-50, it seems like, in conversations. So I think for me, the 160-day calendar was a soft landing point between the two, and that's where that was created. I have stated before that the 4-day schedule creates some challenges. Those are, and you've touched on all of those. But for our teachers need more time. They need more collaboration, specifically focused professional learning time, and that is one of the red flags that has been presented to me over the last few years with the Monday late start schedule, is that they have reported to me that generally the first half an hour or so of that hour is pretty productive, but by the second half of that hour, their minds start to shift on all the kiddos showing up to class Monday and getting ready for those kiddos, and the work is just not as efficient and effective. And then also the late start clearly creates a scheduling challenge for our kiddos, our parents, every Monday. And so trying to find a better schedule was part of that driven. But it sounds to me like there's maybe more of a preference to just remain at 5-day and recognize that may need to go a little deeper on the phases to align the budget. It may also mean a shift in maybe the philosophy of having a 1% contingency fund built into the budget next year. We're just not in a situation to maybe go that full amount, and maybe somewhere in between is where we'll be at, as long as the board is aware that, that really means you may not increase your overall reserve account by 4%. It might be it might be 2, and 2% of that might need to go back into the general operational budget throughout the year to take care of things that we have done our best to estimate, but that won't match real costs. Jimmy, your comment about inflation that's our concern. I'm doing our best to estimate, but I saw a report, I think Jeff shared out, that, our utilities have gone up, by double-digit percentage increases the last several years. That it just makes it very hard to estimate, what are those new costs going to be in 6 months, let alone a year.
Are those pieces padded? They're not. Okay.
No, we unfortunately are over our budget, especially for water. For next year, yeah, we are. Some of the utilities cannot give us estimates for rate increases, so we're taking a look. We're applying CPI, especially with Avista. Though we've had 2 years of 15% increases, so it'll have to be more than CPI just to feel safe. But yeah.
Can I move us to wrap up this part? Are we two quick things that I do want to point out. One is just a timing in our agenda planning, and this came up when we were with Leslie doing agenda planning earlier, is that in May there is a rate increase conversation. It happens right after some of our decisions. So I followed up with that with Jeff just to check on and it really has to do with that 20,000 that is on our sheet, facility use increases. That conversation will happen after that 26, but I did follow up with Jeff just to see how accurate is that number, because that rate increase conversation, I think from what I understand is gonna be somewhat, there's a lot in it, and so I just wanted to point that out so that no one's asked the question later, well, why we didn't have this conversation before, why not? And so I don't know, Jeff, if you just want to speak to that a little bit, because I feel like the timing on it is gonna be interesting, and how, yeah, and so how accurate is that 20,000 there?
Thank you for that question. I think, that's a conservative number, but I think we also want to be conservative in this. This is a challenging issue to, wrap our minds around. There's one camp that says, our facilities are supported by taxpayer dollars. Why are we even charging rental rates? At the same time, we're talking about utility increases, and, we have some really heavy users on our fields that, use them quite a bit. And so we need to take a hard look at that. I'm working on a proposal. I've been doing a lot of rate studies of what other districts do, around the state, in Washington, in our region, and it's all over the place. It's everywhere, right? And so, we are going to bring a proposal to the board, and I think it's going to suggest a small increase to our indoor rental fees. We haven't changed them in like 12 years. So, and then, the reality is our outdoor fields, we rent for $375 for 4 hours, right? So it's essentially, it's less than $1 an hour that we're renting our outdoor fields for, and we can't sustain that, right? It's way out of line. Yes, for a 4-hour block, right? So it's less than $1 an hour that we're renting our outdoor fields for. And so currently where we're at is I've sent a letter out to all of our rental users. Yeah, I've sent a letter out to all of our rental users to say, look, we're doing a fee assessment. You can expect there's going to be some rate changes to this. Some of our user groups that come in use it, 500, 1,000. We've got a couple that are, in several thousand hours that they're renting from us. I think we also have to be cognitive of maybe presenting a phased approach to some of that as well, so that, we're not putting sports clubs out of business, right? But there's going to have to be some shifts in this as well. So we're trying to present a well thought out plan, and so I think that's part of where, that is probably a conservative number, but we don't know. We might change rates and people are like, hey, we're going to go look at some other options as well. But I can also tell you, looking at this community with what the city charges and things like that, there's not a lot of options out there really. So.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to point that out so we weren't taken off guard later. And then my last comment, I guess, before we look at future dates and move into exec is we've been so in the weeds as a board. And I guess one of the things I've been struck with, even that I've had to remind myself is just we as a board, you know, in all of our training and stuff, everyone always encourages us to take the 30,000 foot approach. What does school look like, not just next year, but 3 years, 5 years, the next generation of kids? And so I just appreciate our conversation even today around schedules and all that, and want to encourage us that that's our role, is we're in the weeds lots, and we have to be, because that's where we're at. But what does Coeur d'Alene education look like into the future, and to lean back a little bit? And I know I'm speaking to myself here, because I need to lean back and say 30,000 feet. What does a board do? That's our role. So speaking to my own self, want to thank admin. And for all those that have brought the numbers and answer. I mean, there's pages of questions here. And so thank you to the community for the questions. Thank you all for your work. Thank you for the hearts of teachers and staff who are deeply impacted by all these things. And so
There's just a couple of things that I don't think we've touched on in our conversation yet, but I know that I'm hearing a lot from the public. We're given certain numbers here to choose from as we click and unclick our different choices that we can make. With what we're looking at right now, is there not a way that we can cut curriculum by more than that 500K and start looking at dropping unnecessary contracts that we have and replacing them with free options? Also, everybody is loving the HRS work that we're doing, but is that a cost that we can actually absorb right now? And can we make that an option as something that we can pull out of this? As well as, I've been asked a couple of times now about why building administrative isn't being looked at with the 2 FTE before the building classified at 1 FTE, as far as phases are concerned. And really, if we were to cut back to only offering half-day kindergarten at all of our schools, and can we offer full day as a tuition based? Because I know that we have desire for full day, but it seems like we have a lot of desire for that half day. And what cost savings would that bring us if we cut back to the half day and then have the potential to generate more revenue?
Shannon, do you want to address the kindergarten
Yeah.
one, and then I'll jump in on the others?
Just for the kindergarten, 2 years ago, the legislation and governor supported a pretty significant increase in K through 3 literacy, with the intention to use those funds to really allow districts to offer the full day K. So if we went back to half day K, we need to make that money's restricted, and it is used to cover a significant portion of kindergarteners. You'll see it in Fund 249 when you're looking at our budget docs. So we would be limited there for that. We would have to offer some full day K because of the intention of the K through 3 literacy funding.
And I'll try to.
Shannon, does it specifically say as a string attached to that money that it has to be used for full day kindergarten if it's K-3 literacy?
Not specifically, but we would have to find over 2 million of current expenditures for literacy, specifically for K through 3. So we would, instead of using it on teachers, we would have to find, more than 2 million of allowable K through 3 literacy expenditures, which we would not have. We've used that to cover kindergarten teachers for full day K.
Well, that's kind of a quandary because the state only funds us the divisor for kindergarten, I believe, is already half-time, correct?
Correct.
So, maybe that should be a comparison. I mean, is it worth offering the full day as we currently to try to get that money from that fund? as opposed to only being funded for half-day kindergarten by the state. So I don't know. I'm sure you've crunched those numbers, but if you haven't, that would be an interesting thing to look at to see if that's really worth offering. I like your ideas, Ellie. I've thought of some of those myself. I mean, I think this is a time, like we've talked about, these decisions are all difficult. None of them are good, but we're going to have to be really creative. And I think admin's done a great job. But there's probably the potential to come up with even more ideas. I'm sure we can continue to come up with ideas. But that would be, I would like to know that, Shannon, if that's not too much of a hassle.
Well, let me jump in and just again, all of these decisions and rankings were meant to be as far away as kids as possible. So honestly, taking kindergarten and reducing it to halftime is directly affecting kids and a step backwards. So it's not something that we've spent a ton of time evaluating. We have a few hundred survey responses that would be potentially interested in a kindergarten program that's a half day, and some of those responses clearly came from parents that were foreseeing enrolling a student in school in the next couple years, maybe not necessarily having a kindergartner today. So again, as an advocate for early learning, for us to take our entire kindergarten program and cut it into half would be a step backwards and is against our entire process here of trying to keep things away from kids. Could we do it? We could look at it. But I think, as Shannon has shared, the early literacy funding is directly tied to those salaries that we offer. If we cut the program down to half, you're just not going to get those funds. It's not going to save you any money. We're just not going to receive them from the state.
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify that. Yeah, we would have to show if we're not using it on kinder teachers, what would we be using it on? We don't have. Like, we've increased our expenditures for that, so we would have to find
it's line itemed for early learning.
Other
so
allowable.
You have to find something else that would meet their
Yeah.
criteria, or they withhold the funds.
Well, as we reduce staff, I'd be curious how many kindergarten that affects our kindergarten. And also, oh shoot, I just lost my train of thought. I had one more question. Oh, one more thing that I didn't see on the budget, but I think was talked about. At one time, we spoke of increasing class size just by a few students per class, and I don't see that on our little click sheet. Is that something we're not considering anymore? And if we are considering, what kind of savings would we look at?
It's
with
built
that?
into each of those phases on that spreadsheet. So as staff are reduced, certified instructional staff, you can see through each of those phases as you make those specific reductions and cuts, then you have less staff to fill those vacancies, and a shuffle goes on.
Yeah, and just to speak to the cost savings to that we would have to increase class size, that wasn't one of our recommendations to increase class size, knowing that we're trying to keep these cuts as far away from the classroom, and impact in increasing those class sizes, that will affect student achievement, especially when we're talking about, and Patty can speak to this, our elementary levels and the increased behaviors that they have. Just it's been a huge priority not to affect those class sizes.
Yeah, I get that. I just know that we had spoken about it like we've spoken about so many things, and I just wanted that clarified because I didn't see
So let me jump in just a second and try to address a couple of things that I can still remember from Trustee Anderton's list, and then catch me up because I'm sure I'm not going to touch them all. But you asked the question about an additional cut to curriculum, and I would say that will be significant effects on students. That $500,000 cut is our maximum cut to our curriculum expenses, without removing current curriculum resources that our teachers have, and giving them nothing. Most of your curriculum resources are subscription based and allowed to access a website or access a book online for the year. And so when you don't pay those fees, they turn that access off and you wouldn't have those resources. So your kids in those various different programs that rely on that funding wouldn't have that. Our curriculum budget for 10,000 students is at $1.7-ish million, and which is already far too low. I mean, we're just pinching. The $500,000 reduction came after many meetings with our curriculum team and Katie as the curriculum coordinator, and really did exactly what you've asked to maximize what is the most we could do in our curriculum, and that $500,000 is the max, unless you choose to just tell your students, okay, you don't have these resources. Tell your teachers you don't have these resources next year. Figure something out, and that's not obviously keeping the cuts as far away from our kids as we can.
We're 1.7 now. We will be at 1.2.
Correct. Yep. So that $500,000 was is the maximum on the curriculum reduction that we can propose. And then I know, Trustee Anderton, you asked the question from why isn't the building administrative FTE higher up on the list? And I will point blank say that I may have had those specific 2 FTE at our elementary buildings, maybe up in the phase 4 category. But as this process has been a collaborative process, we have spent an exorbitant amount of time meeting with our administrative teams in those specific buildings. And if our focus is keeping those cuts as far away from kids as we can, the administration has convinced me that because of the enhanced behavioral challenges that we are exhibiting primarily in our elementary aged students, those building administrators are really directly assisting our teachers in remaining in the functions that the teachers are supposed to be doing, rather than having to deal with firsthand and consistently throughout the day all of the behavioral challenges that they're facing. So they implored us that the administrative team, those 2 administrators, are ranked higher on the needs list. Therefore, they're lower on the cut list. But everything's really close. I mean, let's be clear. We've got nurses on phase 1, and is anybody going to say a nurse is not important? They save lives. Nurses are very important, and that's the level of ranking between a 1 and a 5. It is that tight because everything is super important with what we do. So that's why those rankings are there.
If we're looking at behavior as one of the reasons why we would keep that administrative staff in the phase 5, then why would we be looking at our psychologists before that?
All of the above, but
They're
because
dealing just as hands-on, if not more.
again,
and
back to
in a-
alignments across the state, right? I mean, that's why maybe the nurses are at the top of the list. This district had a goal when I got here that we wanted to have a nurse in every building. That's been a goal in this district for a long time because of the specific needs. And here we are reducing from our 12 FTEs of nurses, down to 8. The psychologists, based upon our evaluations of other districts within Idaho and the ratios of student to psychologists, indicate that we have more room in the psychologists to reduce our psychologists. Our administrative ratios are not there, and that's why administrators are down lower on the list. And we're talking 2. We were talking about reducing 2 FTEs, which would create 4 part-time administrators, in those assistantship roles in the elementary schools. But again, with the closure of a school, that also creates all your other elementary schools being larger, therefore justifying that second administrator in those schools even more. And so it's a very complicated philosophy, and I greatly, we do greatly appreciate the questions. I just can't reiterate enough that at times I feel like there's a lack of thought that went into creating these phases and these recommendations, and I can't emphasize that is farther from the truth. This has been months and months of lots of work by our team to create these specific recommendations, and now we're to now we're to a scenario where we've just got to decide what, with the big pieces being the calendar and the school closure. Those are two of the bigger dollar numbers that are in effect. And what I'm hearing is the school closure is still being discussed. That the calendar is perhaps more preference to just remain on the 5-day calendar, which will mean we will have to decide how far down on the phase cut list do we want to go. And they're all painful. They're all disruptive to the incredible services that we're currently providing to our community and our students.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. We can continue to dig in over the next bit. I do want to lift up our future dates here. April 29th, 4 o'clock will be our special meeting. There will be public comment. May 13th will be our regular meeting, and May 20th we have a workshop. We are going to move in to executive session, and so I'm going to go ahead and have our motions all taken care of, and then we'll take a few minutes and clear the room. So is there a motion to move into executive session per Idaho Code 74-206 1B to consider the evaluation, dismissal, or disciplining of, or to hear complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent or public school student?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call. Ms. Southwick? Yes.
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 All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll take a quick recess.
Did she call my name?
Oh,
Trustee Bierke.
Yes, I'm still here.
thanks. We'll go ahead and we'll clear the room then, and we'll move into executive session and close the door. Thank you very much. Call you on the telephone, like on our speakerphone. Okay. Is that all right?
What was that?
We're going to call you on the cell.
Oh, you're going to call me on my cell?
Yeah. Is that all right? We'll just put you on cell.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm going to disconnect right now.
Okay. So give us a couple minutes and we'll get you on.
Yeah, sure.
All right,
No
thanks.
problem. Thank